Welcome to Your Infinite Health. Are you getting older?
Are you feeling it?
How would you like to do that in reverse?
We're your host,
Dr. Tripp
and LeNae.
We've run an integrative medicine practice for 13 years.
Together, we have 60 years of combined experience helping clients.
We've helped tens of thousands achieve success in health and live longer, happier lives.
In this show, we'll cover peer-reviewed and evidence-based integrative approaches to creating the health you've always wanted.
We also share professional experience we see in the field every day.
So if you're ready to feel, look, and live your best life, you're in the right place.
Welcome to Your Infinite Health podcast.
So sitting here trying to figure out, I asked Tripp what successes he'd had this week, and he was like, everything's a success. So wasn't really helpful. So I thought we'd talk about Dune. So we went to go see Dune 2 last night. It was really long, but very, there was not a dull moment in that movie.
No, not at all.
I just hope they don't wait too long before the third one comes out.
5 years for the next.
Because you have to go back. When they wait so long between these series, you forget what happened in the first one. So you got to go back and watch that. So you get caught up for the next one. Anyway, we had to go on Thursday because there was no getting a seat. I'm a geek. I have to have the middle row. It has to be the middle seat. And so if those are taken by the time I get tickets, I won't go because I don't know. It has to be the sweet spot for me or forget about it. So that's what we did last night. And then got a great interview we're going to get into in a minute. And then this weekend, I think we might be going to a junior, I don't know what you call that, a child's baseball game.
Little league
yeah,
baseball
okay,
or something?
Yeah, a little league baseball game. Should be fun. Our kids don't play sports. Maybe they'll get inspired if they go to one.
Esports. You do esports.
Oh, okay, yeah. Virtual kickboxing or kick fighting or street fighting or whatever that is. I don't think that counts.
And virtual building.
Yeah. So anyway, that's we just worked all week and had a little fun and maybe going to a ball game, but not much else going on. However, we have a really great guest. I always learn so much when we have guests on, things I never knew. So it's always exciting, this guest in particular. And but real quick, I have a joke.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Why was the bagel struggling in his yoga class?
Oh dear.
Okay, you don't know.
No, I don't know.
Because he couldn't find his center. Okay, that's like my segue. My segue into our guest, whose name is Yogi Aaron. Yogi Aaron is a trailblazing yoga teacher who is leading a global rebellion on the harmful practice of stretching. He pioneered the groundbreaking application to yoga that shows people how to live pain-free by activating muscles through applied yoga anatomy and muscle activation. In a world where conventional stretching and flexibility practices are the prescribed norm for pain, Yogi Aaron's unorthodox method provides a safer, more effective, permanent solution. What sets him apart is his wisdom, infectious humor, adventurous spirit, and personal healing journey, which distinguish him as a beloved leader in the community and at his Blue Osa yoga retreat in Costa Rica. Thank you so much, Yogi Aaron. Is that what people call you, Yogi Aaron? Is that your birth name?
Yeah, they call me Yogi. They call me Aaron. They call me Yogi Aaron.
Yogi Aaron.
Everything, the stop stretching guru.
Nice. I definitely want to get into that because that's kind of a controversial little thing you got going on there, the stopping stretching.
Just a little bit.
But before I get that, I want to know, what's your story? How did you even get to be the stop stretching guru?
Yeah, I got into yoga, I think, like most people do. For my body was tightening up and I just felt like I needed to stretch. I think, if you ask most people why they want to stretch, most of them will tell you because they think it's healthy and because it helps us stay young. If we look at, the archetypical person who is looking older, they usually have more limitations in range of motion. They look stiff. So it's very intuitive to think like, oh, in order to stay young, I need to stay limber is a good word. And so that's why I got into it. I'll give you kind of two sides of the story. So the first version is like I got into it, I got really inspired over time. I felt like yoga was one of the only things besides working out or cross country running or snowshoeing or all the other things that I used to do when I was younger, or hiking, that yoga was really the only thing that could help me concentrate. And so it was from there that I really got interested in starting to teach yoga. And then I met some really incredible teachers that were deeply connected to the Himalayan tradition. I started studying under them. I've been to India 10 times. And then that kind of journey in a nutshell led me to opening up a yoga retreat center in Costa Rica. So that's like one side of the story. And so I mentioned that just because my love and belief, if you want to use that word, in yoga was really strong. Now, the other side of the story is that I got into yoga and I quickly injured myself. And I thought I injured myself because I was stiff. And so I started to develop back problems. I went to many yoga teachers, even movement specialists, and all of them said the same thing. I needed to open my hips. I needed to stretch my back. I needed to stretch my tight hamstrings. And so I kept doing that and I developed enormous chronic pain in my body, which led me 25 years later to an emergency room of a hospital when an orthopedic surgeon told me I was going to need a spinal fusion in my lower back. And that is how I became the stop stretching guru.
So, wow, that's you did not go through with that, I hope.
No, no, knock on wood or whatever is around you. I have not had to have a spinal fusion yet, and my goal is not to. I believe very strongly that I now have the tools to keep my body healthy. There is definitely some damage to my body that is probably irreversible. But what I do have control over, which is probably what we're going to get into talking about, what I do have control over is making sure that my muscular system is working properly. And that is one thing that we all have control over in our lives. And as long as we have, as long as we're not like paraplegic or something, we do have that ability to have that. So I believe like very strongly I won't have to ever have it.
Gosh.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, I hope not, because that just sounds terrifying.
It is a terrifying procedure. It's a huge procedure, and it takes, if you're lucky, it takes you 9 months, 9 months to recover. If you're lucky, if you're not lucky, it can take 2 to 3 years. So
Statistically, the pain relief outcomes are less than a coin toss, quite frankly, uh, as an outcome there. So yeah, there are much better things to proceed with prior to that medically. After certainly after knowing that you're not supposed to stretch any longer.
Well,
yes.
so that specialist told you to do that, and you were like, no. And then, so where is the connection between that event and you discovering that, quote unquote, your word, stretching is killing us?
Yeah, I mean, literally. And so I had already put my toe into this world called muscle activation. And so I kind of started to know a little bit about it. I had experienced it in my body. I knew the power of it, but there was a huge disconnect. And there was a disconnect for a lot of things. And for any of your listeners, who are tuning in right now, I completely identify with yoga teachers who have a really hard time with this concept because that was my challenge, was who am I as a yoga teacher if I'm not teaching stretching? And so that was a big kind of flipping of the script that I had to do in my own brain to kind of get over that hump. But when a very good colleague of mine was doing muscle activation on people. And so I started talking to him about my own issues, and he worked on me. And he basically said, Aaron, this is exactly why you ended up in the emergency room. There's these key muscles that are just not working in your body. And so when I say not working, what I really mean, and one of the words that we often use in our lane is like the muscles are not turned on. And it's kind of metaphorical, but it's also very applicable because literally the muscle isn't turning on. It's not connecting to the central nervous system or your brain. So when your brain senses like, oh, we need to get these muscles to work, nothing is turning on. Like the brain doesn't know where the muscles are in space. And so the muscles can turn off. And the reason why they turn off is due to stress, trauma, and overuse. So the byproduct of stress is inflammation. And inflammation is what gets into the literally the nervous system, the nerves, and starts to impair that communication system between the brain and the muscles. So if you have a lot of stress, in your body, you can have muscles that aren't working, and that's why I ended up in the hospital, because I didn't have any stability in there. So then he started working on me, and it was kind of like a light bulb moment. Like, I really should learn more. I think ending up in the hospital made me realize that I didn't really know as much as I thought I did, which was very humbling. Well, you kind of have to, yoga teachers, I think, don't ask this question enough. And the question is, and by the way, as I say yoga teachers, I'm reflecting on my own lived experience. So, but I feel like we don't in our world say, what don't I know? And so that was a question I really had to ask, is like, what don't I know? That led me into studying muscle activation, where I quickly started to understand why stretching shuts muscles down and what we need to start doing in the meantime. So that's kind of how I got from my surgery to muscle activation, then into yoga.
So, can you define muscle activation?
Muscle activation, in my definition, anyways, is the process of basically just turning muscles on, or fortifying that neuromuscular connection. So as I mentioned earlier, what I mean by fortifying is that connection gets compromised. And when I say connection, I'm literally talking about the space between your central nervous system and the muscle, so that you can imagine like a phone line. Now, I live in Costa Rica, and phone lines here get really damaged. A monkey comes up and chews on it, or, the weather, the beach, the ocean air, all of these things cause stress on that telephone line, literally. So telephone company has to come and either replace them or fortify them. And so when we do muscle activation, what we're doing is fortifying that telephone line between the brain and the muscles. So when the elements of stress, the monkey comes along and chews on it, it's not going to shut down. It's not going to shut down. The stress tolerance of it increases. So that's muscle activation, is a process of turning muscles on and then also fortifying that communication system. By the way, that was a good question. Nobody has ever asked me that before.
Oh, well, I didn't know. I didn't know what that meant. And now my next question is how? How do you turn a muscle on?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. One of them, which is not in my lane per se, but it definitely can sometimes work. It depends on how you use it. But e-stem. So doing e-stem on people, where you put those things, electricity pads on people's muscles.
Okay.
What I would say about that, just for anybody listening, thinking, oh, that's a great idea, you can overdo it. And so using a very small current is really helpful and beneficial to do that. The second way, which is what I learned in muscle activation technique, is actually doing manual palpations. And so you go in as on somebody's muscle and you palpate at the insertion and origin. It's not as simple as what I just made it out to be. It's a little bit more of a process, but that is the second way. And the third way, which is what I teach, is through doing isometrics. And so by actively shortening a muscle, you can start to re-trigger, that's a good word, re-trigger that connection between the brain and the muscle. And so for most of us, our central nervous system, because that communication system has been compromised, most of our central nervous systems don't know where muscles are. Ergo, the muscle isn't working, it's not turned on. But when we do an isometric contraction, it starts stimulating that neuromuscular connection. So then it refortifies it. So like an isometric contraction, here's a really simple one. And we've actually been given this a lot. So a lot of us that work at computers, we get tight, neck muscles. And so the truth is that a lot of our neck muscles are tight because our back muscles aren't working. But a really simple hack to kind of like, let's use this word, loosen the upper traps and get them actually turned back on is just simply slowly shrug your shoulders, bring your shoulders up to your ears, and then hold it there for 6 seconds, and then slowly lower back down. And so that's one of the key things about what I teach, is just really slowing things down. Because as soon as I said that, most of your listeners probably just like immediately just shrug their shoulders, like brought their shoulders up to their ears and then let them drop. But that's not what muscle activation works. It works through slow movements, moving up and then holding it there for 6 seconds, and then slowly lowering it down, and then repeating that for a total of 6 times. So that's kind of the magic number. Isometric, 6 seconds, 6 times. And less is always more. So those are the kind of like golden rules, if you will. Some of them.
That's really cool. That's like we just learned about breathing and techniques for breathing and holding your breath longer than something and then releasing, so you could actually do your breath work while you're doing your
Isometrics, yes.
A little bit almost like Tai Chi, right? The kind of that continuous slow movement and doing the exercise like that, as opposed to quick movements and complete contractions and all at once.
Yeah, and again, just to kind of reiterate something I've said, what we're kind of doing, and this isn't the best word to use or the best way to describe it, but we're retraining the central nervous system. We're rebuilding this neuromuscular connection. And so tightness, the two of the ways that we know that those systems are compromised, and kind of obvious, but it's not obvious to everybody, is pain. So pain is the number one check engine light that comes on that tells you there's something wrong with this neuromuscular connection. There's a weakness going on. And then the second one is muscle tightness. So I got into all of this because my hamstrings were tight. At the end of the day, it was really because my hamstrings were tight. And I thought that hamstring tightness was the sign of getting old. And so I wanted to get rid of it. What's kind of interesting to me is that in 25 years leading up to being in the emergency room, not one yoga teacher or muscle specialist, and very prominent yoga teachers that I studied under, ever said to me, Aaron, your muscles are tight, your hamstrings are tight because your quads are not activating properly. Your nervous system is not connecting to that. So we have to get them activated. Or saying your hamstrings are tightening because it's a protective mechanism. So muscle tightness is always a protective mechanism in the body. When your body senses instability, it tells muscles to tighten up.
I thought you were saying that it tells muscles to like muscles are just like, I'm done working for you, I'm out of here, severing the connection.
Well, it is that. It is that. I mean, but the body has to guard itself somehow. So, like when you step out on ice, for example, and if you stepped on ice, you kind of like almost feel like you're slipping. What does your body do? there's a biomechanical response. It just tightens everything up, right? So muscle tightness is a protective mechanism, and the body just says tighten up, tighten up, tighten up. But it does that because other muscles are not working properly. So it just sends an SOS message to whatever muscle it can tighten up to stabilize the body as best as it can.
So it's kind of like certain connectivities have become complacent, and they've kind of gone lacking, and in favor of one or the other group of muscles, and then that's how you end up damaging them when they're needed all at once, and that type of thing. So interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Like little muscles start to take over and do the job of these big muscles. An example of that is like when somebody sneezes and their lower back seizes up on them, spasms. And so that's like, a huge sign of like real instability in a neuromuscular system that's been very compromised, because when they sneeze, what should have contracted was the abdominal muscles and some, maybe even some of the major muscles in the lower back, like the longissimus or multifidus. But what ended up happening was like these little minor muscles starting to take over, and it was just too much stress for them, and in response the body just then goes into spasm mode.
Yeah, I do a technique called prolotherapy using regenerative techniques, and that focuses a lot on the integrity of the ligaments in that in the back, and I'm sure you're well versed in that, and I've always asked that same question about, well, why are we limbering up? Because uh, for many areas in the body, the key to having healthy joints is that those ligaments stay flexible but tight and hold things in place, because when they don't, then the muscles get involved, and they're not meant to, they're really not meant to hold things in place. They're meant to move things around, and so you end up with these contractions trying to hold things in place that accumulate lactic acid and create those spasms that you're talking about. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, well, and I would just say too that, from a movement specialist perspective, what I always tell people is that muscles have two jobs. They basically move bones and they stabilize joints. And so, but they stabilize joints through different ranges of motion. So, for example, like I always got knee pain when I was hiking. And sometimes the knee pain got so excruciating, it would take days for it to heal, even up to a week sometimes. And so, at one point in my early 30s, I had to hang up my hiking shoes because my knee pain was so bad. However, after I ended up in the hospital and I started doing more muscle activation, what I started to realize was a couple of things. But some of the muscles that weren't working in my body, my glutes. And if you look at where the glutes are fascially, they connect down into the knees, right at lateral epicondyle, and then into the fibular head. And um and so, if the glutes aren't working, that's going to also have more of a effect on the stability of the knee. And then the other major muscle, was my hip flexors. And so one of the hip flexors, of course, psoas major, if that's not working, and so the psoas major and the glutes are like the suspension system in the hips. And so if those muscles aren't working, or the suspension systems slash shock absorbers. So I live on a dirt road, and I've traveled on that dirt road without shocks that were working, and you can feel it in your body negatively. So if your body's suspension or shock absorbers aren't working, all of that stress is going to go now into the knees. And if the muscles surrounding the knees aren't working, aka like the rectus femoris, which covers the knee, it literally wraps around the kneecap, then you're going to not have so much stability. And as I got into muscle activation, what I started to find was my knee pain went away. And it was kind of an interesting experiment, because I actually wore a knee brace when I started getting back into hiking. But as I started doing these exercises more, and again, increase the stress tolerance level of that communication system. My pain, I just didn't need to use my knee brace anymore. So that was really cool.
Wow. And so would you say your knee pain is gone?
Yep. Yeah, I really don't deal with knee pain anymore. I actually just wanted to add one thing because I know a little bit, not a lot, probably not, definitely not as much as you guys do about prolotherapy, but I know enough to say that a lot of that, especially the prolotherapy that I've received, a lot of it is around trigger points. So again, you're activating that neuromuscular connection. So it can be for me, it was a very useful tool to start reintegrating. It was one of the few things that really helped me when I was dealing with a lot of chronic pain.
Yeah. I mean, we've had really good result.
Yeah, extraordinary results since I've only been doing it about 9 years now, a little over 9 years, but the results are extraordinary.
Only 9 years.
Yeah. No big deal. Yeah. So for somebody who's dealing with pain and they're listening to this and they're like, I need to activate my muscle. Is it a one and done? Is it a daily thing you have to do? Is it a lifetime practice? Does it replace any other exercises that you're doing, like spinning or pickleball or anything like that?
Yeah, those are great questions and a lot of questions to unpack. So, yeah,
I know.
I would say it's never a one and done, and the reason why is, again, I want to come back to muscles start becoming that neuromuscular connection starts becoming compromised due to stress, trauma, and overuse. And so as we're dealing with stress in life, we're going to probably, that's always going to have a negative impact. So any kind of stress is going to have a negative impact. So what we can do, and let me talk about one of my clients who I was working with in the last year. He came to me and he was dealing a lot with sciatic pain, and like enormously. When I say sciatic pain, his pain level was 9 out of 10. He could barely walk into my apartment when he came to first see me. I got him on the table and I worked on him for an hour and a half. When he got up, his pain dropped to 0 out of 10. He said he could not feel anything going on anymore. So that was a huge win. I gave him some exercises, and then 2 weeks later, he said that the pain came back. So he, with working with him over the following year, it was kind of like a little bit of a yo-yo, but it was always the trajectory was always in a good way. The last time I worked on him, so as we're talking right now, it's like March. The last time I saw him was at the beginning of December, and he has not contacted me at all for like a follow up session. So he said that after our last session, he was feeling so good. It was just more of a maintenance check. But the key thing is that I gave him some exercises. So he spends anywhere from 8 minutes to 20 minutes a day doing his isometrics, making sure that that the neuromuscular connection is strong. Now, one of the things that you said was, or asked me was, can it replace anything? I would say yes and no. It's kind of a double-edged sword because we only have so much time in our day to do stuff, right? But for those people who are doing exercise, here's the fundamental problem. If you're going into your exercise, and when I say exercise, I could mean walking, even running, hiking. You mentioned a few things, working out in the gym. I had a woman in my retreat last week who plays tennis. Her shoulders are messed up. I was going to use another word, but they were really messed up. And so, I said to her, Sam, if you keep playing tennis with these shoulders and you're not going to do something like these exercises, you're going to end up really damaging them. So here's the thing, if you start off weak and you go do like tennis, like Sam did, then you're just going to get weaker and you're going to have more and more problems. So you always want to start stronger and you want to make sure like that connection is working. But here's the great thing. If you start off strong, and you go and play tennis or something, chances are you're going to keep getting stronger. So we need to do maintenance to make sure like that neuromuscular connection is strong and stays connected, so that when we get stress from the outside world, which all of us do, right? Like even like sitting right here, as we're talking, sitting is a little bit of a form of stress. So, any kind of stress can have a negative impact in the body. So, we always have to do maintenance. The good news is it gets easier. And as you feel your body getting stronger, there's always a natural inclination to keep doing it, right?
It seems so. It seems, and doing integrative medicine is, I always start putting things together, and that, and I think, I think a lot of people, because when I see people say with a knee, for example, that's developed arthritis or whatever, and and this is very much a component of it, right? That refined stabilization that the muscles provide for the knee, but as I approach the ligaments, the lateral collaterals, the patellar, the quadriceps, all of those ligaments, and the fascia that I'm doing the prolotherapy on, I like to have some form of complementary exercise that, and this is exactly what you're talking about here. I think it really provides that. It's an integration and a combination of things is probably going to get us the best outcomes, as opposed to just trying one thing by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, I had done prolotherapy before, and actually, just I have a person in Vancouver, Canada, who is really great at it, and so I usually will see him anytime I'm back in Vancouver. What I can just say though is that a lot of the ligaments end up getting overused, and as you said, like there's a lot of focus on elongating them and stretching them, which is to me is absolutely insane, because you actually want them in their most healthiest state to be able to stabilize joints. And what I would also say, from a muscle activation perspective, when muscles aren't working around the joints, and you're going through different ranges of motion, and let's just use hiking as an example. That's a pretty, or even just walking, going for a big walk. If your muscles aren't working, what is the body going to start using to stabilize that joint? The ligaments. And so that's not necessarily the best outcome. You want the whole, let me say this, you want the whole system working together. You don't want just one part of it working, because when only one part of it is working, what is the byproduct of that? Stress. There's stress is always going to ensue. And when you have stress, what do we always have? Inflammation. And inflammation, again, is what is causing the pain there. So we want the whole system working and integrated. The work that you're doing is really great. We want those, areas, quote unquote, to release, but we also need to then follow up to start getting that neuromuscular connection, to get the brain or central nervous system connected to those muscles. So one of the elements that I didn't mention yet, so muscles move bones and they stabilize joints, and they do that by shortening. And so there's a lot of out there like muscles need to be lengthened. Well, here's the thing, muscles will always lengthen when they work properly. And so they got to get them to shorten properly. A healthy muscle in muscle activation world, we define a muscle that is healthy by a muscle that can contract and contract on demand. And so, anytime we move our body, and we're going through different ranges of motion, aka walking, muscles around the knee, the ankle joints, the toes, the hips, all of those areas, all those muscles should be working, synergistically, and they should all be able to function properly and shorten when they need to. So a muscle, again, is a muscle that can contract and contract on demand.
I can see how there may need to be some re-education in well, in schools, right? Because
You're
they're all
absolutely
about, I
right.
just remember when I was in school, it was all about stretching before and after you do anything. And my daughter was a rower, her poor hips are all jacked up. And I know she was always talking about, like, I think she blames herself for her issues for not stretching like she was instructed to. So I can see this topic being very beneficial for physical education teachers in the, in the schools.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack with your daughter. I could go into a 20-minute monologue about that. But it's kind of, to me, it's really bizarre because you mentioned school. Like when we were in grade school, we learned about biomechanics. We learned that there is a relationship between agonist and antagonist muscles. So if you flex your bicep, the tricep, which is the antagonist, is lengthening. And we also learned that muscles need to shorten to move bones. And when one muscle is shortening, the opposite muscle relaxes.
I don't think I learned that in grade school. I don't know what kind of school you went to. That was not at the public school system I was in. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So, but no. I mean, that could be true too. But the funny thing to me is like then you go and you hear like you're supposed to stretch, and all I can say about that is it's kind of like a group think or herd mentality. Group think is a better, more polite word, but it's kind of like this herd mentality. It's just like we just accept something, we just accept a belief, and nobody ever really challenges it. And so we never really use our common sense. I mean, I had a movement specialist kind of get into an email debate with me, and she was one of those people that said, oh, we need to lengthen muscles to strengthen them. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that just doesn't make sense. And so we need to kind of like, it's a combination of using common sense and also relying on what we already know. I call myself a trailblazer in this only because I'm challenging the group thing. But everything that I'm saying is based in science and based in what we know to be true about muscle function. So
Cool. Okay, one yoga pose that one yoga pose you should avoid. What is that? Is it the tree pose? It's the tree pose that nobody can do anyway, right?
that's the one that you wanted me to say.
That's true.
No, tree pose is actually a good pose to do, although it depends. There's a few caveats to that. No, the one yoga pose that you shouldn't do is the one yoga pose everybody loves is child's pose.
Child's pose. Or at least it's not the shavasana, because isn't that the point of yoga?
No, shavasana is great. Again, we look at why muscles become compromised, that neuromuscular connections because of stress. Shavasana is a great pose because it fundamentally decreases stress in the body. We need to practice relaxation more. So, Shavasana is a great pose. No, child's pose is definitely the one pose you should avoid because it really overstretches the lumbar spine and glutes, because I mentioned that the glutes aren't working in most people, so it's detrimental to people's glutes. It also is having a very negative impact on all the hip flexors. And so if you kind of look at like child's pose, you do the reverse of child's pose. You come onto your back. Do this as an experiment. Come onto your back and bring, not right now, but if your listeners, especially if your listeners are driving and listening to this, do it when you go home.
Don't do this if you're in the car or operating heavy machinery.
But if you come onto your back and bring your knees into your chest, you're going to notice like there's probably a 6 to 10 inches, maybe even 12 or more distance between your chest and your knees. And so that's telling you your natural range of motion. That's telling you where your body is already able to function naturally. As soon as you come into child's pose, you immediately decrease that. And so you basically cut that neuromuscular connection between the brain and the muscles. And you basically shut down or turn off all those muscles, your hip flexors, your trunk flexors, your back extensors, and your glutes.
Wow, because it feels pretty good, that pose, as I recall.
Well, doing a line of cocaine can feel good. Doesn't mean you should do it.
Okay, valid. I have no argument for that.
And not that I would know from personal
Okay,
experience, but
sure,
I
Yogi.
definitely drink a lot of wine, or have in the past. And, it's been a habit I've had to really change a lot, because just because you can doesn't mean
Right,
you
right,
should.
right. That's a valid
Love
point.
it.
Okay, 3 techniques. So you gave the one with the shoulder. What are 2 other ones that the listeners could do?
So there's one that's really great, is coming onto your stomach and doing what often is called Superman pose. This is like one of the best poses you can do. So I was just talking earlier about my client who had sciatic pain, and was still working with it because he's got a compromised lower back. But what he does every single day is this Superman pose. And so this has been, and I can't tell you how many people with sciatica that I've helped just with this one pose. So coming onto your stomach, lying face down, and you bring your hands down by your hips, and then you lift your chest and your legs up as high as you can. And that will start to engage all of the back muscles and start literally turning them on. It's quite a remarkable pose. Do that every day in the morning, ideally. If it's not in the morning, just fit it in wherever you can. You'll notice your stability in your body dramatically increase. It's just golden. The other one that I just want to offer is the pose that I was describing when I said you shouldn't do child's pose, but then do a test. Come onto your back. Bring your arms up to the sides. Bring your knees into your chest. Just squeeze them as much as you can. Squeeze the knees into the chest without lifting up your tailbone. So, don't push your lower back down in the ground. Just don't lift it up, but squeeze them in, because again, what we're doing is you're activating all of your hip flexors and all of your trunk flexors by doing that. Of course, don't hug the knees, because the moment you hug them, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to start to shut those muscles down. So this is kind of the fundamental difference in the way that I teach yoga now, and also kind of understanding what you should and shouldn't do. What we're looking to do again is actively move the body into positions, and that's dynamic, and where there's 100% accountability, meaning that we're using our muscles to move bones rather than using our hands or gravity to move our body. So just kind of hugging the knees into the chest. Again, your arms are to the sides. You're not using your hands, and holding that for 6 seconds, and then just doing it 6 times. That will start to do those 2 things for a week, every day for a week, and see what starts to happen in your
Wow.
body.
The Superman pose, is that also a 6-second, 6-time kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and for my client who had sciatic pain, if you do have like a lot of back pain, just come up just even half an inch. Just do it half an inch, and bring your hands to your lower back. You're going to feel all your back muscles shorten. And by getting them to shorten, you're going to start stimulating that neuromuscular connection, and that's going to begin refortifying slowly that neuromuscular connection between the brain and the muscles.
Cool.
Excellent. Excellent.
You got to go mop your floor before you do
Yeah,
that one.
it's really cool. The big thing, like a lot of your listeners might be wondering, like, well, how does Yogi Aaron know this stuff works? Because one of the things that we learn in muscle activation is how to test muscles. Now, it's not something that I teach. People will not be able to learn this in the course. I learned it through my teacher studying muscle activation technique. But I can go in and test muscles. I can test your muscle's ability to contract and contract on demand. So I know right away whether or not something has a negative effect on you or something has a positive effect. And that's how we know. That's how we know if something is working or not working for us.
You ever get a false positive on that?
Never, never. Yeah, it's a really cool thing to be able to check that and see again if something is working or not working. But that's how we know whether or not something is having a positive effect or a negative effect. And I can tell you, and I can promise you, if somebody does child's pose, if I took 1,000 people doing child's pose and holding it for 30 seconds, which is typical for in a yoga class, 1,000 people will test weak afterwards. And not only weak, but they will test weaker than when they first started out. And so they will lose even more strength by doing that.
Good to know. So you wrote a book called Stop Stretching. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so part of the book Stop Stretching was about just me getting the information out there, but also taking people on sort of a little fun journey in their body. And so, stops on the cover is me in tree pose, by the way, on the beach. And it's a cartoon. Is an animated, pictures, and it's me with my animals on the beach. So everything is kind of done with a lot of fun and humor, because one of my yoga teachers always said, if you're going to be a mess, be a happy mess. And so as we start to repair ourselves and start empowering ourselves, we also have to laugh at ourselves when we kind of don't understand something, or maybe mess up a little bit. We have to take ourselves a little less seriously. So that's also part of the
Yeah,
journey.
for sure. I think that's good advice. I know it's good advice for me as well.
Yeah. But one of the things about Stop Stretching is it will give people immediate solutions to their pain and help them to begin understanding why they're in pain and what to do about it.
Very cool. Definitely have to check that out. What is one thing you want the listener to know?
Well, one of the things that I said earlier was that we don't have to live in pain. We don't have to be in pain, that we do have the choice to get out of pain. And just for clarity, I'm talking about physical pain right now. Mental pain, that's not in my lane.
whole other episode somewhere else. Okay.
That's a whole other episode. But definitely we have a choice. And so I would just say to your listeners, know that there's answers out there, and don't stop until you get them, because and really consider muscle activation, because most times we help people, and it's usually the solution to a lot of people's issues. Again, when muscles aren't working properly, the result is always going to be inflammation, stress, and then stress leads to inflammation. So we can have a very positive impact on our bodies when we start getting our muscular system working properly.
And where can everybody find more about you and get your book?
So my book is available on Amazon. Just search Stop Stretching on Amazon. You'll find it really quickly. You can also check out my website, which is yogiaaron.com. And I believe you'll be putting that in the show notes, so people can go and access me. And I have a lot of freebies on there. They can actually get a free solution to their pain. Most people have neck pain, back pain, knee pain, and shoulder pain. So just choose your track and you can get an immediate solution to your pain right away.
Cool.
Excellent.
Well, Yogi Aaron, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom. I learned a lot.
As did I.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to
Nice.
try some of those poses myself. And you don't have to worry about me. I will never do child's pose again.
Hallelujah.
I'm a convert. That was an easy sell. All right. Well,
thank you so much for having me on, guys. And I'm always here to be of support whenever I can. So just let me know how I can be of service.
Will do. Thank you. Listener, I hope you found this educational, informational, somewhat entertaining. And until next time.
Thanks for subscribing to Your Infinite Health. I'm Dr. Tripp.
And I'm LeNae. Until next time, feel it, look it, and live it.